Everybody supports criminal justice reform, right? We always hear that it's a bipartisan issue. Even Donald Trump talks about it. If you want to see criminals get punished, that just makes you a Nazi. Like always, I have to be the contrarian here. Criminal justice reform is nothing but donkey piss. At the end of the day, all it amounts to is just being more permissive towards crime. A bleeding heart view of criminals is not going to prevent crime. It's just going to encourage more of it. The people demanding reform are the same type of people who don't care about crime. They grew up wealthy and pampered and never had to put in an honest day of hard work in their life. Or perhaps they themselves are criminals. To these people, letting crime flourish is just a necessary consequence of combating mass incarceration. Now, mass incarceration is real. The United States is a carceral nation. We imprison the most people of any other country by far. But why is this? Reformers would have you believe that our laws are simply too harsh. When I compared sentencing laws of various US states with foreign countries in Europe, Russia, China, and Australia, I couldn't find any evidence that the US law was more punitive. The actual reality is the United States was designed to be a carceral state. Mass incarceration is baked into the cake. The US conception of government is based off the philosophy of Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. We need to explore this. In this fantasy world, we all come to life as autonomous individuals who just want to be free. However, the lack of any law and order results in nothing but a free-for-all. There's nothing stopping us from stealing or attacking each other. Therefore, all of us give up some of our freedom in order to create a government. The purpose of that government is to protect our rights. The US view of government can be broken down into the relationship between two different parties. The first party is the autonomous individual. The second party is the punitive state. When incarceration is the only acceptable punishment, the punitive state becomes the carceral state. This relationship is pervasive across every aspect of our society. It infects institutions and leads them to funnel people into mass incarceration. Every problem is a square peg that needs to be hammered down through a round hole. So let's break it down. I'll go through institution by institution. I'll explain to you how it's dysfunctional. Finally, I'll propose reforms that might actually solve these problems. Number 1. The public schools. Our public schools provide absolutely no moral instruction. At one point in our history, our schools provided at least some practical advice through classes like shop or home economics. Those classes don't exist anymore. Why the lack of moral instruction or practical advice in schools? Well, our schools take it for granted that its students are autonomous individuals. This view is perfectly illustrated by the role played by the school's guidance counselor. The guidance counselor doesn't generally provide guidance. The student must tell the guidance counselor what they want out of their life. Only then can the counselor assist them. The schools don't teach practical skills that the students can use to make money. They also avoid any discussion of religion or politics. The one exception being the celebration of civil rights and a denouncement of racism. The end result is a dull presentation of information in a vacuum. One that would leave even the most curious and eager student absolutely bored to tears. The idea that students are autonomous individuals is utterly ridiculous. They're children. They need to be shaped and molded. They need advice and moral instruction. We ought to offer them motivations for learning. The fact that we provide no advice or moral instruction leads to nihilism. Nihilism then results in crime and incarceration. If we use public schools to mold students into good citizens, we'd get better outcomes. This is heretical thought, though. Because remember, the government is only supposed to protect people's rights. If we want real criminal justice reform, the first step would be to change the way that we think about schools. Our schools ought to teach students practical economic advice, relationship advice, and politics. People like to learn information that's actually useful to them. If learning helps them make money, get married, or win a political argument, they'll want to learn it. A good way to accomplish this is to base the curriculum in the local economy and local politics. The school should also incorporate elements of a traditional liberal arts education. The liberal arts were a type of instruction aimed at preparing students to become citizens of a liberal society. The idea was that if you were going to be an autonomous individual, you needed an education that guided you into making the right decisions for yourself. This included learning subjects that aren't taught in schools anymore. Things like rhetoric, logic, ethics, and classical music. Number 2. The foster system. At any given time, there are thousands of children in foster care in need of families. At the same time, there are thousands of married couples desperate to adopt children. Why is our system so fucking stupid? It takes a lot for CPS to remove a child from a dysfunctional home. The parents have to be deemed absolutely unable to take care of their kid. Typically, this is due to a severe drug addiction, or the parent ends up going to prison. Assuming the child is very young, like a baby or toddler, why not give it to a couple who wants to adopt? That would certainly be in the best interest of the child. It'd also be good for our society overall. Of course, this makes far too much sense for it to become public policy. Instead, we base our entire system on the rights of the parent. You know, the parent who utterly failed to take care of his or her own child. So we send the kid into the foster care system. The idea is that the kid can sit around in there until the mom or dad gets released from prison or quits using drugs. So many people want to adopt children because they want to have normal families. Isn't that what everyone wants? No one wants to raise a kid for 10 years and then have to give them up. Under the foster care system, as soon as the kid's biological parent is able to take care of the kid again, they get them back. The foster system in the United States is so overwhelmed that many states have to pay people in order to foster children. How's that good for the child? They're a paycheck to someone now. Why do we have our entire system revolve around the rights of some sort of failed parent? It makes no sense. In the case of young children, we ought to adopt them out rather than put them through the foster system. Growing up with loving parents is better than bouncing them around different homes. That's something that would make real progress towards criminal justice reform. Number 3. Child support. Who should take care of the children? This ought to be a very simple thing for society to handle, but not so for the United States. Traditionally, women were expected to have sex only after marriage. If an unmarried woman was knocked up, the expectation was a shotgun wedding. If that didn't happen, the pregnancy would be kept secret and the woman would be moved to live with a relative. The woman's relatives would support the woman while she raised the child. These traditional norms have been long since abandoned. They've been replaced with the idea of the autonomous individual. After the sexual revolution, marriage was no longer a necessity before having sex. If the woman got pregnant, she could get an abortion or become a single mother. This simply wouldn't be taboo anymore. This is just in theory though. In reality, women can't just become single mothers. They have to work to support themselves. What they can't do is work and support themselves at the same time as taking care of a child. Unless they're a high wage earner, daycare isn't going to be an option. So in order to accommodate this new lifestyle, the taxpayers now have to fund a welfare state. The welfare state makes single motherhood a real possibility. Unsurprisingly though, the taxpayers didn't like this. Why do they have to support this mother and her child when the dad who impregnated her contributes nothing? This is where the carceral state steps in. It starts engaging in mass surveillance. All employers are ordered to submit quarterly records to economic security listing all of their employees and their wages. Bank records, casino winnings, and real estate transactions are all monitored by the state. If the state pays out welfare to a parent, it tracks down the other parent and hits them with a paternity test. If the non-custodial parent isn't working, it threatens to throw them in jail in contempt of court. If the state discovers that someone's working under the table, get ready for criminal indictments. Something as simple as who takes care of the children leads to mass surveillance and incarceration. That's because, once again, every aspect of our society and government gets reduced down to the relationship between an autonomous individual and the carceral state. Here's my proposed criminal justice reform. If you get knocked up and you aren't married, it's your own goddamn problem. Number 4, mental health. Stop criminalizing mental health and drug addiction. The police aren't there to solve every social problem. I've heard this garbage a million times. You know, prior to the 1970s, these problems weren't treated as crime problems. If you were crazy or addicted to drugs, you got your ass sent to a mental hospital. No criminal record, no jail, no prison. Of course, the left-wing progressive Supreme Court had to fuck all of this up. In O'Connor v. Donaldson, the Supreme Court made a revolutionary decision. The state cannot intervene in the affairs of an autonomous individual without first convicting said individual of a crime. In other words, the only things that are allowed to exist are an autonomous individual in a carceral state. I'm partly joking. The court actually ruled the state cannot hold someone in a mental hospital without proving that they're dangerous. Of course, the only way the state could ever effectively accomplish this is by proving the person committed some sort of crime. Therefore, from then on, mental health and drug addiction would be problems that would need to be addressed by the police. My proposed criminal justice reform here is obvious. Reverse O'Connor v. Donaldson and bring back civil commitment. Number 5, the police and the courts.
The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched, and the persons or things to be seized.
We all know police need to get a warrant before they search your house, right? What if everything we know about the police is wrong? What if we've misunderstood criminal justice altogether? It's time to talk about Justice Antonin Scalia. May he rest in peace. Surprisingly, this is my first time talking about him on this channel. I could probably do a whole video on his legal philosophy. If anyone's interested in something like that, hit me up on email or something. I know legal shit can be boring, so it'd be something that I'd want to feel out before doing. Most people think the purpose of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution is to require the police to get warrants. However, Antonin Scalia has argued it's actually meant to discourage warrants. We all know that a major gripe behind the American Revolution was taxes. The British Empire sent these tax officials to investigate people who weren't paying their taxes. They often were given warrants by English judges that gave them broad authority to search people's houses and businesses. As Scalia explains, the founders fucking hated these G-men tax collectors. According to Scalia, the true purpose of the Fourth Amendment is embodied in the first part of the text. The real purpose of the Fourth Amendment is to protect people from searches that are unreasonable. That's it. It doesn't require police to get any sort of special warrant or anything. So what about the remaining text? According to Scalia, this portion was actually included to discourage and limit the use of warrants. This text was included to make sure that a warrant could only be issued if it included all of these things. Well, why would police ever even want to get a warrant if it's not required by the Constitution? Well, they'd want to in order to cover their asses in case they got sued. Judges have a much greater degree of immunity from civil lawsuits than police do. If a police officer fucks up a search, he can be sued. However, if a judge signed off on it, it's all good, right? Well, as long as it meets all the requirements in the Fourth Amendment, then yes. If it doesn't though, arguably the Fourth Amendment leaves open the possibility that even a judge could be sued. Of course, that's just Scalia's interpretation. The majority interpretation is police can do basically whatever they want, so long as the judge signs a warrant. In this way, the Fourth Amendment has become the vehicle for the same sort of bullshit that the founders were trying to ban by including it. I'd take this argument even further. I'd say the founding fathers would have disfavored a system that places so much emphasis on disconnected court officials. In our current system, the prosecutor, the defense lawyer, and the judge micromanage everything. They make sure that thousands of procedural rules are complied with. Through all of this legal procedure theater, the simple questions often get overlooked. Is this fair? Are we being reasonable here? The Supreme Court took on the task of regulating the police in the 60s and 70s. In 1963, it mandated that public defense lawyers be provided to impoverished criminals. Despite all of these reforms pitched as protections for criminals, incarceration rates skyrocketed. Part of the problem is that our system puts the criminal defendant in the driver's seat. He picks whether to take the plea deal. He decides whether to go to trial. It's up to him whether or not to testify. After all, the criminal defendant is an autonomous individual. The problem with this is that the criminal defendant is many times mentally unsound. He may be competent to stand trial, but is a poor decision maker. If he's out of custody, he may be making these decisions under the influence of drugs. One problem that's endemic to our system is its arbitrariness. Cases can get tossed or pled down due to technical or procedural problems. If witnesses fail to show up for a gang trial, the defendant gets acquitted. However, at the very next trial, the prosecution may get their witnesses to testify at court and the defendant's found guilty. This arbitrariness might not be a big problem if a rational person were calling the shots. However, once again, we have a criminal in the driver's seat. One common characteristic of criminals is that they tend to have narcissistic personalities. This leads them to engage in motivated reasoning. They often believe they can win cases that they have no chance of prevailing in. What reforms might actually help the criminal justice system? Well, perhaps we should consider making policing and trial advocacy less technical and procedural and focus more on general propositions like fairness and reasonableness. Maybe we shouldn't put the criminal defendant in charge of everything. I'd consider giving juries more discretion. Let the jury have the power to subpoena its own witnesses and pursue the leads that it wants to. We can still permit the defendant and his attorney to present whatever evidence they want to the jury. That being said, it would be the jury now that's running the show. I'd also suggest giving the jury the ability to determine what the defendant's sentence is by a majority vote. Anyways, I could spend all fucking day coming up with ways to fix the system. The problem with politics, though, is nobody wants to think critically about anything. People prefer simple, dumb fuck politics.
Drug war bad. Laws are racist. Own some lives matter.
Anyways, if you enjoyed this video and you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please support small YouTube channels like mine by subscribing. Thank you.